Hi, and welcome to the Bleeding Edge podcast. I'm your host, Ralph Benker, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Emile Ogier. Emile, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ralph. Great to be back.
Well, as usual, we're going to start with the news headlines in 60 seconds. Can I do it in 60 seconds this time? Emile, start the counter. So, first up, OpenAI is in code red. Code red is really their kind of response to Gemini, and it looks like Sam is trying to focus OpenAI on how they're going to beat Gemini, certainly when it comes to the consumer access. Anthropic brags it never does code reds, so we're watching some differences in strategy there. DeepSeek just open sourced a model that independent tests have said rivals GPT-5 and even Gemini. So this is really interesting because obviously DeepSeek are open sourced on these weights. It's an MIT licensed model. So really taking the game to the closed labs like OpenAI. Salesforce and Microsoft both saying AI is driving growth. So this is quite exciting because we're really starting to see some real revenue numbers coming in, but I think investors are still wary as to whether enterprise is AI ready, and we're not seeing growth in all areas, but definitely some positive numbers coming from Salesforce and Microsoft. Meta wants WhatsApp to be a walled garden, so this is news this week. Brussels has basically accused Meta of some non-competitive play, so they're essentially not allowing other apps to interact with their WhatsApp platform, and Brussels doesn't like that. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Banks are borrowing tens of billions to build data centers for OpenAI. This is really in reference to the kind of the broader economy that is now building up around OpenAI's investment in data centers. And so what you're really seeing is a lot of developers starting to borrow quite a lot of money to actually build those data centers. So basically increasing concerns that a bubble is building. Should anything go wrong with OpenAI, then there's an enormous economy behind it that's going to fail. In other news on Suno, they're buying Songkick, which is basically a platform for live music. So this is really interesting. An AI music generation platform that is pumping out 7 million tracks a day, now also buying into live music through their Songkick acquisition. An interesting news story from Replit. Replit is a coding agent, and back in, I think, June, July, there was a big news story that Replit's AI deleted a production database, and that's become quite a meme in DevOps circles. I've actually had an AI agent delete my production system as well, so I've had experience of this myself, but Replit are trying to basically resolve that, and there's some latest news just on how we can actually fence off industrial robots and AI agents. Then in other news on Apple, they've just lost their AI chief. Did they even have an AI chief? Anyway, he's gone, and he's passing on the torch to his number two in Apple. So we'll have to see what comes out of them. Nvidia has some news. They've just started to release some of their new open source. Well, they've started to release their new servers for the Chinese open source models, and they are running 10 times faster. So this is all in the background, obviously, to Washington arguing that they shouldn't be allowed to export chips to China, and that negotiation is ongoing. I think Jensen was in the White House in the last week having that conversation with Trump, arguing that they should be allowed to sell their chips to China. And then just the last news item, Anthropic, they used one of their agents to find a $120 million DeFi exploit before attackers do. So they've basically been using their tool to find vulnerabilities. And obviously this has raised some really interesting security concepts that maybe we are looking at AI security agents will become the norm. Anyway, those are the 10 top news stories. Any of those sound interesting to you, Emile?
It's all interesting. It just not a week goes by that ceases to surprise me just how many new developments there are. And I did hear something quite interesting. This year has been so rich in releases. Somebody's estimated there's been a new significant release in something in the AI world every 3 days.
Well, hence we have this podcast to try and keep everybody up to speed with what is going on. And of course, even though those were the top 10 stories, it's worth calling out that there's quite a number of stories that really are quite fundamental. Amazon, for example, is not one that we talk about that much on this show. And they've got their AWS and Bedrock offering. And AWS is actually doing a massive expansion on Bedrock, and they're adding 18 fully managed open weight models behind a single API. So basically what their play is to build a model supermarket, a little bit like Hugging Face, but Amazon really starting to build some of that infrastructure where it's not about having the single best model, but actually being able to pick the best model for the task. And obviously they're pushing some of their own models. XAI, for example, also in the news, sometimes for the wrong reasons. Still, I would say their lawsuit against OpenAI, and there's some interesting things going on there with they're seeking discovery from a mystery South Korean entity. But what they're also doing is they're building out domain-specific models, especially around law and compliance. Now, obviously around law and compliance in particular, what's held that industry back with AI is hallucinations, because it's very dangerous when you hallucinate a law or illegal precedent or even a case study. And so XAI pushing quite heavily on building out those domain models, which I think is probably how we start to really see AI agents succeed, especially in specific industries. So much going on, as you say. But why don't we jump into your first story?
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to add to one piece. You're right. I don't think we've covered Amazon enough. It is hot off the press due to the recent Black Friday specials. I'll try to make a concerted effort to introduce it into our next episode. But effectively, they were running with Rufus, the agent model, in all earnest. And it looks like sales conversions have been significantly increased. So looks like, agents are doing their job, at least as far as Amazon is concerned.
Well, absolutely. I mean, Black Friday has been a real revelation of AI-driven e-commerce. I think it's jumped something like 805%, which, you might expect somewhat given the relative newness of all of this. But I think the big story is obviously that AI traffic is converting at a much higher rate. So just what you're seeing there with what you're quoting with Rufus, that's actually playing out across the piece. When people use AI chat to actually discover product, the likelihood that they're going to buy is just much higher. And I'm seeing anything from 16% to 35% being quoted as the increase in conversion over traditional Google search. That's a lot of money. That's massive. And of course, what we know is, SEO isn't the answer. You need to do answer engine optimization. AEO, GEO is all these new terms to make sure that you actually rank within the AI agents. So, or at least within the LLMs and the AI search. So a big upheaval in e-commerce happening right now.
Yeah, so thanks, Rolf. So without further ado, I thought I'm going to try something a little bit different and add an educational piece to the show. And we're thinking maybe do this weekly. So let us know what you think. Today we'll be covering GPUs versus TPUs, as I've been personally interested to understand them a little bit more. What are they and how are they different? So GPUs are graphic processing units. These are made by Nvidia and considered the generalist. TPUs are tensor processing units and made by Google. They are considered the specialist. With GPUs, what are the pros? They are widely available on demand with the likes of AWS, Azure, and GCP. They can be bought outright for on-prem, meaning you'll be able to own the physical hardware, and it has versatility and good for quick prototyping. Additionally, they offer broad support. The cons, they're high power to cost, so this means high OPEX, and you get NVIDIA lock-in. With TPUs, the pros are it has high efficiency, meaning high performance per watt, and seamless integration with GCP, and it allows for green scaling. The cons are GCP vendor lock-in and a steeper learning curve. So what are the key takeaways? GPUs are better for short and varied jobs, making them good for indie labs, startups, multi-cloud, and irregular operations. TPUs offer a big long-term savings, as much as 40 to 60% savings for massive, predictable AI runs, which makes them good for enterprise LLMs, Google-centric solutions, and green AI. Lastly, what is green AI or green scaling? This is an emerging movement and set of practices focused on reducing the environmental impact and carbon footprint of artificial intelligence systems. So lower power drawdown to run the chips, which also leads to lower cooling costs. Both are major components to data center savings. TPUs, for every watt of power consumed, typically deliver better computational, which is also known as flops, leading to roughly 2 to 4 times better performance comparable to GPUs in AI workloads. So that's really it for today. I hope it helps you feel a little bit more informed. It certainly has done for me.
Yeah, and GPUs, obviously we can put these graphic processor units in our PCs, which allows us to run local models as well. TPUs, those tensor processing units, Google are planning to put into their space data centers. So those are the things they're going to be testing to see if they can handle the radiation and conditions of space. But yeah, unfortunately, I have an onboard graphic processor on my computer. I really do need to get myself a dedicated GPU so I can start running some local models. But it's quite an interesting landscape, and the battle between Nvidia and Google in terms of processor dominance is really, really fascinating. Obviously, ASML, that Dutch based company that has actually funded Mistral, which is the European LLM. They are the makers of the machines that make these processing units. And so it's quite fascinating just to see how everything originates just from a few players, but obviously polarized between Nvidia and Google. So that's kind of fascinating.
So fingers crossed. Hopefully we get one in our Christmas hamper if somebody's keen to offer us a Christmas present.
I want a TPU. I definitely want a TPU, and I want a GPU. I want to run them side by side. Anyway, I'll have to get our little tech helper to build me a new computer, I think. So great. Thanks for giving us that. One other really interesting finding that I've had over the last couple of weeks. We've been talking about prompts, and there's been so much around prompt engineering, and every week again seems to just bring about a more advanced look at how we can use prompting to actually get the best out of these large language models. And one of the recent papers that came out from Stanford was really around actually a very simple prompting technique. So I'm just going to share this with you because it's so simple. I'm pretty sure everybody's going to be able to give this a go. And essentially, the Stanford team found that if you stop asking for one answer and you actually ask the model to show you multiple answers with probabilities, then you can really activate the creativity of the LLM. And so essentially the prompt is generate 5 responses to this prompt, and each with their probability. So generate 5 responses to this prompt, each with their probability. So if you just add that one line on to your prompt, it supercharges the creativity, and you really start to get edge responses. So responses that you wouldn't normally get. Obviously, these LLMs are probability machines. They predict what you probably want. And this is why prompting is so important, so that you can help it predict the response that you want. And adding this single line into your prompt really game changes the creativity. So generate 5 responses to this prompt, each with their probability. Try that, Emile. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you get. And it'll be interesting to chain that with our last recommendation, which was using the hermeneutic prompt circle, which is really trying to get the LLM to understand the underlying intent of your prompt. And so I think those two together probably will give you some really different results from the linear prompting that we so often do.
Very cool.
So have you got another story there for us?
I do indeed. Another product after my own heart. In a surprising move, Affinity are releasing their product suite for free forever and for everyone. I've personally bought and loved the products for years. I found the overall user experience to be more pleasant compared to the steep learning curve required for the likes of alternatives such as Adobe Suite. And it doesn't come with all that UI bloat while still remaining powerful and feature rich. Now they've released one single app for all creative workflows and added new ways to customize the app that never existed before. What's also pretty awesome is you'll now be able to share native Affinity files that anyone can open and edit. This has never happened before. And it has a new brand, a new icon, and a new single file format. I do think this is an interesting one from a marketing position to take. And I have wondered, with the wealth of free AI art generation services out there hitting the shelves, that their model offering was looking vulnerable. I didn't quite believe this one and I had to check it for myself, but it really is free. And what's great, the data remains yours. They don't train your content on AI and they don't monetize your content. So it really begs the question, why are they doing this? Affinity are saying that they have the money from their Canva income and they want to offer a unobstructed creative experience for creators. So it'll be just really interesting to see which way this goes.
So Affinity is essentially like the Adobe suite, but free.
Correct.
Wow. Well, that sounds very
And
powerful.
it's extremely powerful. Matches, put it this way, there's nothing that Affinity does that I haven't been able to replicate inside of the Affinity suite.
Well, that's definitely one to try. And obviously, Nano Banana, as part of the Gemini suite, was kind of touted as the Adobe killer. And, it has fantastic capabilities. There are many other tools that are probably as capable when it comes to design work, especially for designers that want K output. So does Affinity do 4K output?
You caught me off guard. I'm not really sure, but I'll be surprised if it couldn't. I've never
Yeah,
needed to
well,
take
that's
it
definitely
that long.
one for us to test. Great. Well, that's a really interesting share. And if I might just follow up with Mistral AI, I mentioned it earlier. This is the European LLM, and actually, they are. This is one of the first times we've had some news from them, and they've got their Mistral 3 model family launch. So this is essentially moving them from frontier processing to edge processing, which is a kind of a fascinating play. So Mistral Large 3 and the smaller multilingual models is optimized for Nvidia platforms and lightweight processors. So this means that you can actually run it on a GPU on your local machine. And obviously this is much cheaper really than using a frontier model like OpenAI or even Gemini. And I think that's really important because good enough runs anywhere is definitely what most of the market needs. Sometimes, when we look at these models, we are essentially using a model that is way more capable for the activity than we require. And so it's an expensive approach to solving a general query. And so these good enough runs anywhere models, I think, are really the future because they can run on-prem, they can run on the edge, and they also run inside the European data sovereignty constraints. And so that's a really important point for Europe, some really interesting constraints to GDPR when you're processing data for German consumers. So there's quite a lot to think of in terms of that. So Mistral really going for what I think is an unexploited part of the market. Probably a little bit where DeepSeek are also targeting with their open weighted models. And another bit of news just on Mistral, given we speak about them so rarely, is that they've also announced a multi-year contract to self-host Mistral's commercial models for HSBC. So that's a nice big enterprise deal for them. Obviously, Mistral also funded by ASML, that Dutch hardware manufacturer, and they are essentially providing all of the operational improvement for innovation for ASML. So Mistral really closing some absolutely key deals, and interesting that a flagship tier one bank choosing a non-US lab to provide those services. So that really strengthens the argument that enterprise don't want to be locked into a single US hyperscaler. So a good bit of diversity there for the market.
Yeah, interesting. I'd like to touch on one of the news items you circled through earlier, just expand on it. Looks like on the legal front, Rolf, it looks like Elon Musk is trying to literally flip the script on the whole court system, suggesting that an AI judge can look at cases and arrive at verdicts within seconds. Benefits include no lawyers dragging things out for months, no endless filings, none of that red tape that takes simple disputes into life-ruining bills. And it comes as no surprise why this might be raising concerns within legal professionals. The existing system favors additional billable hours, which translates to higher profit margins. Just imagine a fast, clean system with no games, no delays, reduced complexity, and no confusion. Musk is essentially challenging the system and asking, why does the course of justice take years when the facts are available for immediate processing? It's an interesting one. Efficiencies are there for the taking. However, how does one weigh the cost of hallucinations potentially changing the course of justice, which is what you raised earlier, Rolf? Would love to hear your thoughts from our listeners. What do you think?
Well, I mean, there's no doubt that the legal infrastructure is definitely up for transformation. The system doesn't work for so many. It's expensive, it's cumbersome, it takes a long time to get results. So I think all of that is good, but obviously that structure exists for a reason. So I think we'll have to see how that one plays out. But I would be quite concerned with, given the state of some of the outcomes that we're seeing with agents. I just recall a recent case where a school had implemented a surveillance system, and one of the kids was out on the grounds eating a pack of crisps, and this surveillance system basically flagged the kid as having weapon, having a gun, and the system actually initiates an escalation process. So it let the school principal know that it had flagged somebody. The school principal then approved the escalation to call the local police, and not 5 minutes later, 5 squad cars roared up at the school, guns drawn, and they raced towards this kid eating his packet of crisps. Now, essentially the failing was the human in the loop. They didn't verify. Obviously, people didn't look at what the AI was seeing, and they didn't override it. And so the system actually worked, but humans allowed the system to go too far. And so I think some of this is just we need to play out. The AI agents are still fallible. They're still making mistakes. And even when we have human oversight, humans are anticipating that these systems are infallible and in fact are correct. And they just say, yes, please continue. It's a little bit like when you're vibe coding and the system asks you for permission to execute the next bit of code. You don't actually know what it's trying to do, so you just say yes. And I think that transparency is a little bit of an issue when it comes to legal decision making as well. But no doubt we will be testing that, and we'll be getting it wrong and we'll be getting it right. Let's see. Hopefully the collateral damage is not that great. But, even if one person gets sentenced incorrectly, then it's wrong. Yet, we know that happens with the current system as well. So on balance, we have to figure out if we can improve it. But it's pretty fraught. A really interesting story, that.
That's scary. I guess what we can learn from that is, there's mistakes being made on both sides of the fence, both with humans and agents. So it's something we certainly need to add more rigor around.
Yes. And what's interesting about that is it kind of plays a little bit into my next news story over here, which is a concept that we are now calling tokenomics. So, whenever we process anything through an LLM, what we are doing is we're essentially processing tokens. And a lot of these models are able to process a lot of tokens. So I think Gemini now has 1 million tokens that it can process in a prompt. ChatGPT 5, something like 500,000 tokens. And basically you have input tokens. So this is when you give it a prompt, and there are output tokens, which is when it actually gives you some result back. And the reason why this is really important is because tokenomics, so the economics of token usage, this is really the key battleground for enterprise grade LLMs. The cost of actually processing anything through an LLM, that's really what we're talking about here. And so just to understand this a little bit better, token is essentially 3 or 4 characters. So anywhere between 0.75 of a word or half a word. So and probably would be considered a token, and essential might be considered 3 or 4 tokens. So any word that you write is essentially a token, and there is a cost to uploading that token to the LLM and a cost to the LLM processing that and essentially outputting a result. And so this is actually quite key because we've had a lot of changes in pricing with Claude and GPT and Gemini over the last few months. So the models are always changing their prices, but it's really important to understand how all of this plays out. I've seen quite a lot of articles and even case studies and also feedback from my network that some of the things that they've been processing, they've been surprised at the cost. So, if you're processing an enormous number of product descriptions, for example, if you've got an e-commerce site and you're running 10, 15, 20,000 products, you might be spending some thousands on processing your master data through these models. And so it's really important to actually pick the right model. And I think a lot of people just used GPT 5.1. And obviously, one of the key things that OpenAI has done with that is it will pick the most appropriate model to actually process your response. And so the variety of models has been slightly abstracted. And even Gemini has many models, Flash being their cheapest one. Gemini actually offers dynamic pricings. One of the things that happens there is as soon as your prompt exceeds 200,000 tokens, they actually double the cost of the tokens. And so one of the things that you have to do there is you have to chunk your prompt down, so split it down into smaller text blocks so that you don't hit that 200,000 token limit. And the other thing to consider is that, the price difference between these models is really, really big. Let's say, for example, you've got 100,000 monthly product descriptions. You'll pay about €9 with Gemini Flash. Whereas with Claude Sonnet, it's going to cost you €427. And certainly that was as at the middle of October. I know they've had a bit of a price change, but what we're seeing there is a factor of 47 using Claude Sonnet over the cheapest Gemini model. So it's really, really important. And even with N8N, when I'm building these flows, sometimes we're a little bit quick just to pick our favorite model. But I've started to optimize which model actually processes the particular request. And I'm not just picking the best and smartest model anymore, because it makes a really big difference on the cost. And Gemini is kind of positioning itself as the low cost processor. And obviously we've seen that Claude typically is at the premium end of the scale. And one of the reasons that they can charge that price is because they are also trying to give you a very sophisticated output, but you don't necessarily need that. And even with Anthropic, there are a range of models. So something to bear in mind. And I think this is what most marketing agencies and marketing departments are really hitting, because, especially with video and images, you're just processing a lot of tokens. A million tokens sounds like a lot, but actually, how much do you really get for that? Tokens equal money, and we're all essentially playing the slot machine. What are we going to get for our prompt using that particular model? And so something to think about, because you can really reduce your token costs by up to 90% just by picking the right model. So tokenomics, I think that will become a new role in organizations, is really to maximize the output and input tokens. So the input and the output tokens just by picking the right models. And that is a science in its own right, monitoring the pricing from the different models, but also understanding and evaluating, what each model is good for. And as I say, it is a bit of science, because you can actually test it. Evals, for example, is the process that we go through to actually evaluate what each model is capable of. And so for enterprise, especially that enterprise, implementing RAG models, so a closed system where you have a database with all of your corporate data in, and then you use LLMs to interact with that. The cost of that is going to be massive as your data increases. So tokenomics, there you go. Hopefully that's at least given folks a bit of an understanding of what a token is and how you can actually optimize the cost of your input and output tokens.
Couldn't agree more, Rolf. Glad you raised that point. It actually ties in quite nicely with DeepSeek's recent model release. So Gemini is cheaper than cloud. There's certainly savings there, but for those that are possibly willing to look across to the other side of the pond, I'm hearing quite a lot of buzz on DeepSeek, and it's significantly cheaper token-wise on spend. So we'll be looking more into that.
And of course, small language models as well. So being able to run things locally, you don't need these massive billion parameter models. Well, multi-billion parameter models. You can actually do something with smaller models and even run them locally. And I think, for marketing departments in particular, There are so many rich opportunities. You don't just have to use the frontier models. So that's quite a fascinating trend in the AI space. So where are you going to take us next, Emil?
Yeah, thanks, Rolf. So now just to have a little bit more fun, always looking for interesting and fun use cases on how these models are being used and translated into real world services or usages. There's two things this week that came uh, across my attention. The first was somebody had created a prototype glasses, just like the Ray-Ban glasses you had covered in earlier episodes that Meta have released. But they're using Gemini, and the results were quite phenomenal. Even though the glasses were heavy, it was a prototype, but the user experience in itself was great. He chose to ask Gemini how to do an oil change to his car, hoisted the car up, didn't have any working knowledge, got through it without a problem. It seemed quite seamless. And found that personally quite fascinating. I just wonder how it's going to change the services industry with households trying to save money or learning new skills as they get things done. I think there will be some displacement there. So that was quite interesting.
Well, that's great to see that really moving into the consumer space. Obviously, we had HoloLens from Microsoft, which they discontinued, and that was really trying to perfect the heads-up display and give engineers access to the kind of schematics to do complex repairs. But it was expensive. It was a bulky bit of headset. So great to see this innovation. Are you going to get one of these things?
Yeah, it's pretty tempting. Or make a prototype myself. The second use case was this one's a little bit more fun. I saw a satirical video parodying ChatGPT's voice mode, offering food recipes by emulating Donald Trump. It had some entertaining moments, like Trump expressing disdain for vegan options, and even took the opportunity to roast a few of the AI competitors. At first, I had my doubts, but it turns out this offering really exists. And for those that are curious to have a play, it can be found in ChatGPT's advanced mode.
Well, I love that. And obviously, what we're seeing with 11 Labs, we've spoken about this before. They've created the marketplace for voices, and you've got some new voices on there which you can use for your agents. So for your call center, you can have Matthew McConaughey's voice answering the phone. I think creative applications like the one you've just described are really fascinating, but also really fascinating to see how personas are playing out there. So using, when you build a voice agent, yes, you have to pick the voice, you can design the voice, but the real work goes into designing the persona, and that essentially sets out the behavior for the model, and you can get some really humorous and entertaining results just by designing the right persona. So this is also really a new skill that I see coming into the market. A few months ago, I actually saw a job being advertised in Barcelona for a company that makes AI companions, essentially an AI girlfriend or AI boyfriend. And they were asking for a persona architect, so somebody to come in and create, essentially the avatar. And the avatar we always think of as the visual, but in this context, we're really talking about the behavior of the model. So I love the fact that you can get Donald Trump roasting your vegan recipes. I think that's hugely entertaining.
Yeah, so did I.
Well, I'm going to take us to my last story. And this is really something that I'm seeing. It's almost the rebirth of websites in many ways, because, we can now vibe code a website very easily, very quickly. And I think often people have looked at a website as a shop front. As you know, I do a 2-hour masterclass where I take the participants through the art of the possible with AI. And one of the things that we do right at the end in the last 10 minutes is we very quickly build a website based on all of the research that we've pulled together. And that might be for a business, it might be for a product, it might be for a presentation. And what it's really led me to understand is that the role of the website is changing. It doesn't just have to be a shop front, an explainer presentation for what your business does. It can literally be anything. So anytime we create a PowerPoint presentation, for example, that could be converted to a website. And there are many services out there that actually offer free hosting as well for these websites. And the really big shift for me over the last few weeks is just how easy it is for Gemini in particular to generate the HTML code for a static website. And it's really, really impressive. If you haven't tried it yet, I highly recommend it. But one entrepreneur has actually taken it to the next level, and I discovered him through a YouTube video with Liam Otley. Liam Otley is one of those innovators. He runs an AI agency called Morningside, and he brings on people that are really kind of doing something defining when it comes to utilizing these AI tools. The guy's name is Meng To, and he's built a product called Aura. And with Aura, you can create websites using Gemini to generate graphics and interactive and animated websites unlike I have ever seen. So just again, if you change your concept of what a website can be, just think of it as a presentation tool for literally anything. It could be the menu of your hairdressing salon, well, the price list for your hairdressing salon, the menu for your restaurant, the presentation to your investors that you're pitching at. And the reason why I think this is so impressive is because the level of design quality that is available to anybody that is prepared to put in some basic prompting is quite staggering. So it is really now possible to build high quality websites with incredible design features for very little money. And I highly recommend trying it with Gemini. And I'm going to be building out some more examples with Aura. So if you go to the website aura.build, you can see how Meng To, as his name is, has actually put that together. So I'm excited to share that. I'm excited to try that myself. I've had a look at some really impressive examples there. I have been building websites with Gemini over the last month, and it's been pretty impressive. But this model with Aura.build really takes things to the next level.
That's very cool. I'm kind of thinking where that might what the progression of websites might be, leading from that ease of development and release. So maybe experiences will be personalized per user, dropping into the website, looking entirely different for each user, or on each visit, just becoming a more dynamic experience.
And I think it has to. So what we know is that people aren't going to websites as much anymore. They can interact with a lot of the information about your service, your company, via the LLM chat. And so the reason to go to the website has kind of disappeared. I haven't used Google as a search engine in a long time. All of my search is through either Gemini or ChatGPT or one of the other LLMs. And so actually, my experience has become quite one-dimensional. And I think tools like this start to bring the design perspective and the user interface back into the mix. And I do think that it's that kind of experience, that engaging experience, that will drive people to your website. You're just not going to get that, through the current chat interface. And maybe this starts to redefine what the website can be. And I think the rich media and interactive displays that certainly I'm seeing, they're so impressive. Why wouldn't you want that over just black and white text?
Absolutely.
Well, I think that's all the news from me. Have you got anything else on your list?
Just one little piece, Rolf. I found it quite interesting. OpenAI are introducing age verification. I think there's benefits to this on both sides. For children, the obvious things, introducing necessary guardrails so things don't get out of control with what they have access to. But more specifically and selfishly for adults, I don't know about you, but I have, especially the last 2 weeks, been getting quite frustrated with the overly sensitive dialed guardrails on the likes of Gemini when I'm trying to do some art generation and I'm not doing anything untoward or unusual. It just not really understanding the query correctly and thinking I'm trying to do something that I shouldn't, or trying to create an image of a celebrity that I'm not, all those kinds of things. So in terms of adding those age restrictions, that those guardrails can be softened for adults so we can get on with doing the work without, facing those roadblocks.
Yeah, and I think this month ChatGPT are due to release adult mode, so hence the age verification coming in. And I agree with you. I think the models have become slightly guarded. I've had quite a few generations, video generations, image generations. Yesterday, it wouldn't allow me to change the background color on my own picture. I had to argue with it that this is me. It's saying, no, this is an internet persona. So there you go. I'm an internet persona according to Gemini. But finally, I went to GenSpark and it was happy to change the color of my photo. So there you go. Well, I think that's the news roundup for this week. That's an excellent rundown. Emile, thank you so much.
Thank you. See you next week.
We'll see you on the edge. Awesome.